He's back and I can't run. Wrong number. Single dad. Hide now. I'm on my way. Your city or country helps us share stories that feel closer to you. If you'd like to follow along, you're welcome to subscribe. Where are you watching from?
Thank you very much.
Now let's go back to the man at the center of this story. It was just past 10:30 p.m., the kind of quiet hour when the world finally loosens its grip and allows ordinary people to breathe again. The house was dim, lit only by the soft yellow glow from a kitchen light that had seen better decades. A man stood alone at the sink, rinsing a single plate in a mug, moving slowly, deliberately, like someone who had learned not to rush peace when it showed up. His name was Ethan Walker. He was a single father, though you wouldn't know it from any photos on social media or loud declarations about sacrifice. That part of his life existed quietly, the way responsibility often does when it's real. The bedroom door down the hall was closed halfway, the sound inside steady and calm, proof that, for tonight at least, the one person who depended on him most was safe. Ethan wiped his hands on a faded dish towel and reached for his phone, more out of habit than interest. He wasn't waiting for messages. He wasn't expecting anything. Most nights, his phone stayed silent, and he'd learned to be comfortable with that. Silence meant no emergencies, no surprises, no reasons to be needed beyond the morning. But then the screen lit up. One message, unknown number, just 4 words. He's back, and I can't run. No emojis. No explanation, no context. Just fear stripped down to its bones. Ethan didn't sit down. He didn't lean against the counter. He didn't sigh or shake his head or tell himself it was probably nothing. His shoulders tightened in a way that had nothing to do with imagination and everything to do with memory. Years ago, someone he loved had needed help and hadn't known how to ask for it clearly. Back then, he'd waited. He'd assumed. He'd told himself it wasn't his place. That hesitation had stayed with him longer than any scar. The phone vibrated again, a location pin dropping onto the screen like a weight. Across town. Less than 10 miles. In the quiet kitchen, the faucet dripped once, loud enough to sound like punctuation. Ethan's thumbs hovered over the screen for half a second. He didn't type questions. He didn't ask who she was or what had happened or whether she meant physical danger or something harder to name. He typed one sentence, the only one that mattered. Hide now. I'm on my way. He grabbed his keys from the hook by the door, paused just long enough to make sure everything was as it should be down the hall, then stepped into the night. He didn't think of himself as brave. He didn't think of himself as reckless. He thought of himself as a grown man who had learned that some messages are not meant to be analyzed, only answered. As he pulled onto the empty road, streetlights sliding past like quiet witnesses, Ethan didn't know whose life he was driving toward or how wrong the number truly was. He only knew that somewhere nearby, someone believed they couldn't run, and this time he wasn't going to be the person who looked away. The road was nearly empty, the kind of late-night quiet that made every stoplight feel longer than it needed to be. Ethan kept both hands on the wheel, eyes forward, breathing steady, letting the engine hum fill the space where questions tried to form. He did not replay the message again. He did not imagine worst-case scenarios or rehearse speeches. He had learned the hard way that panic wasted time and assumptions made people careless. What mattered was distance and direction. 10 miles became 8. 8 became 6. The phone sat in the cup holder, screen dark now, as if it had already said everything it needed to say. Ethan drove like someone who had spent years fixing things that broke when they were ignored. He knew the city well, the shortcuts between aging apartment buildings and closed storefronts, the stretches where the streetlights flickered and the sidewalks emptied early. He did not speed, but he did not hesitate either. He checked the mirrors, stayed aware, moved with intention. This was not adrenaline. This was focus. At a red light, he caught his reflection in the windshield, a tired face with lines earned honestly, not from stress alone but from responsibility. People liked to talk about single fathers as if the title itself was heroic, but Ethan had never felt that way. It was simply what life asked of him, and he answered because there was no one else to do it. That mindset had shaped him into someone who did not wait for permission to care. The light turned green. As he crossed the intersection, the phone buzzed again, a short vibration that tightened his grip. A reply finally, 3 words, I am hiding now. Ethan exhaled, slow and controlled. Good. That meant she was listening. That meant there was still space to keep things from getting worse. He typed back without looking away from the road, keeping the message simple, readable, calm, stay where you are, do not open the door, if anyone knocks, do not answer, I am close. He put the phone back down and drove. He thought briefly about turning on the radio, then decided against it. Noise would only blur his attention. He needed to hear everything, the tires on pavement, the subtle changes in the engine, the city itself. His mind drifted, just for a moment, to the last time he had ignored a warning sign in his own life, back when he believed love could be held together by patience alone. That lesson had been expensive. He did not repeat it anymore. A few minutes later, the buildings changed. Fewer lights, more shadow. The address on the pin matched a narrow street lined with older brick apartments, the kind with stairwells that echoed and locks that did not always feel trustworthy. Ethan slowed as he turned onto the block, scanning doorways and parked cars. He did not pull up directly in front of the building. He parked half a block away, under a streetlight that still worked, and sat for a second, engine running, listening. Nothing obvious. No shouting. No movement that raised alarms. That did not mean everything was fine. It meant it was quiet. Quiet could go either way. He sent one more message. I am here. Stay put. He stepped out of the truck and locked it, the sound sharp in the still air. As he walked, he kept his hands visible, posture relaxed but ready, the way he carried himself when entering unfamiliar spaces for work. He was used to walking into other people's problems, into homes that were too hot or too cold or on the verge of falling apart. Fear looked different in every place, but it always left traces. When he reached the building, he paused near the entrance, not rushing inside, giving the situation room to breathe. He checked his surroundings again, then knocked once, firm but not aggressive, and stepped back. Through the door he heard movement, cautious, hesitant. A voice came through, barely above a whisper, asking who was there. Ethan kept his tone low, steady, non-threatening. It is Ethan. You texted me. I am here to make sure you are safe. There was a long pause. Then the sound of a lock turning, slow and careful. As the door opened just enough for her to look out, Ethan saw what the message had not shown him. Not bruises, not chaos. Just a woman on the edge of herself, eyes red, hands shaking, holding a phone like it was the only solid thing left. He did not step closer. He did not ask questions. He simply stood there, grounded, present, proof that she had not been ignored. The door did not open all the way, just enough to let light spill across the hallway and confirm that Ethan was real, solid, standing exactly where he said he would be. The woman kept one hand on the door and the other wrapped tightly around her phone, knuckles pale, breathing shallow like she had been holding it in for too long. Up close, Ethan could see the details the message could not carry, the sleepless eyes, the tension in her shoulders, the way she leaned slightly back as if expecting the world to rush at her again at any second. He stayed where he was, giving her space, understanding instinctively that safety sometimes meant distance, not closeness. She looked at him for a long moment, then finally spoke, her voice uneven, apologetic before she even explained. I think I texted the wrong number. The words tumbled out quietly, like a confession she had not prepared. I was not trying to call you. I thought I was messaging my friend. I am sorry if I scared you. Ethan nodded once, slow and deliberate, letting her finish without interruption. It is all right, he said. Are you safe right now? The question caught her off guard. She blinked as if no one had asked her that directly in a long time. She hesitated, then nodded, though the motion lacked confidence. I think so. I mean, he is not here. Not yet. The way she said it made Ethan's jaw tighten, not with anger, but with attention. Not yet was not reassurance. It was a warning light. He did not step inside. He did not suggest calling the police or demand details. He asked the next right question, keeping his tone level. Do you want me to stay until you feel steady enough to decide what to do next? She looked down at the floor, then back up at him, tears gathering but not falling. I do not know what I want, she admitted. Everything feels wrong right now. Ethan accepted that answer without trying to fix it. He glanced down the hallway behind her, noting the silence, the locked doors, the absence of immediate threat. He made a choice that felt small but mattered. He shifted his weight and sat down on the bottom step of the stairwell across from her door, close enough to be present, far enough to respect her space. I can sit here, he said. You do not have to talk if you do not want to. She watched him lower himself to the step, watched the way he relaxed his shoulders, the way he placed his hands on his knees like someone settling in, not someone waiting to leave. Something in her expression changed, subtle but real. She opened the door a little wider, still cautious, still guarded, but less alone. My name is Hannah, she said quietly. Ethan replied with his own name and nothing more, understanding that introductions were not about formality right now, they were about grounding. The hallway felt smaller, but also steadier, like the moment after a storm when the air had not yet decided what it would do next. Hannah leaned against the doorframe, sliding down until she sat on the floor, her back against the wall, eyes fixed on a spot somewhere past Ethan's shoulder. She started speaking not because he prompted her, but because the silence he offered made room for it. He showed up again, she said. My boyfriend. Or ex-boyfriend, I do not even know what to call him anymore. He cheated on me, and when I confronted him, he told me I was overreacting. Like my feelings were the problem. Like I should just get over it. Her voice cracked, frustration and disbelief mixing into something heavier. I left the apartment because I could not breathe there anymore. I just needed to tell someone where I was. Ethan listened without shifting, without correcting her language, without minimizing the hurt because it was not physical. He had seen enough to know that pain did not need bruises to be real. That kind of dismissal left marks no one could photograph. That sounds painful, he said simply. She let out a shaky laugh that held no humor. It feels stupid saying it out loud. Other people deal with worse. Ethan met her eyes then, not intense, not pitying, just steady. Pain does not become smaller because someone else has different pain. That does not make yours any less real. Hannah swallowed hard. The tension in her posture eased just a fraction. She had not known she needed to hear that until she did. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. The building remained quiet. No footsteps, no voices. Just two strangers sharing the same stillness, bound together by a message sent through tears and answered without hesitation. Ethan checked his phone once, discreetly, then looked back at her. If you want, he said, we can make a plan for tonight, nothing permanent. Just next steps. She nodded slowly. Okay? That sounds good. And in that small agreement, something shifted. The night was still uncertain, but she was no longer facing it alone. Hannah stayed seated on the floor, back against the wall, breathing slowly as if matching her rhythm to the quiet presence across from her. Ethan remained on the stair, not checking the time, not glancing toward the exit, making it clear through stillness that he was not in a hurry to disappear. Outside, a car passed on the street below, tires hissing softly against pavement. Then the sound faded and the night returned to its watchful calm. Hannah rubbed her hands together, a nervous habit she did not bother hiding anymore. I keep thinking he will come back, she said, her voice low, controlled, but tight at the edges. Not because he wants to fix things, because he wants the last word. Ethan nodded, recognizing that pattern immediately. Some people did not seek resolution, they sought control. That fear makes sense, he said. You left without giving him what he expected. That changes the balance. She looked at him then, surprised by the accuracy, and gave a small, tired nod. He always needs to feel like he is the reasonable one, like I am the problem for reacting. Ethan considered his words carefully. He did not want to speak like an authority. He wanted to speak like a witness. Being calm does not always mean being right, he said. Sometimes it just means someone learned how to avoid consequences. Hannah let out a breath she had been holding. That sentence landed deeper than she expected. She had spent months questioning her own reactions, shrinking her feelings to keep peace, telling herself that being understanding meant being quiet. Hearing someone name what she had lived with made the hallway feel less heavy. Ethan shifted slightly on the step, careful not to crowd her. If you are worried he might come back tonight, he said, there are a few options. None of them lock you into anything long-term. Just ways to get through the next few hours. She listened closely, appreciating that he did not tell her what she should do, only what she could do. He continued, you could stay here with the door locked and lights low until morning. You could go to a friend's place if you have one nearby. Or, if you want, I can walk you to your car and follow you until you get somewhere safe. Hannah weighed each option, feeling the fear in her chest loosen its grip slightly. I do not want to be here alone, she admitted. Every sound makes my stomach drop. Ethan accepted that without judgment. That is fair, he said. Do you have someone you trust who would not ask a lot of questions tonight? She nodded. My friend lives about 15 minutes away. She told me I could come by any time, but I did not want to bother her. Ethan shook his head once. Reaching out is not bothering someone who cares about you. That is how trust works. Hannah smiled faintly at that, the first hint of something softer crossing her face. She reached for her phone and typed a message, hands steadier than before. As she waited for the reply, the building remained quiet, but Ethan stayed alert, listening for footsteps or raised voices, ready to stand if needed. The phone buzzed gently. She read the message and felt a wave of relief pass through her shoulders. She says I can come over. She said she is awake. She sounded relieved to say it. Good, Ethan replied. That gives you a safe place to land tonight. He stood then, slow and unthreatening, and took a step back to give her room to move. Hannah rose from the floor, smoothing her jacket, checking her phone again as if to anchor herself to something familiar. She hesitated at the doorway, then looked at Ethan. Thank you for not making this bigger than it needed to be, she said. For not telling me what I should feel. Ethan met her gaze, his expression steady. You do not need permission to feel what you feel, he said. You just need space to decide what comes next. They walked down the stairwell together, their footsteps quiet and measured. Outside, the air was cool, the street still mostly empty. Ethan scanned the block once more before nodding toward her car. I will follow you until you get there, he said. Not because I think something will happen, but because you deserve to arrive without worrying. Hannah did not argue. She unlocked her car and got in, glancing once in the rearview mirror as Ethan started his truck and pulled out behind her. As they drove, the distance between them remained constant, a silent promise kept without words. Hannah felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest, not hope exactly, but stability, the kind that came from knowing someone had shown up and stayed steady. When she finally turned onto her friend's street and saw the porch light glowing, she felt the night loosen its hold. She parked, stepped out, and watched as Ethan slowed, giving her a small nod through the windshield. He did not wait for thanks. He did not linger. He simply turned the truck around and drove away, leaving behind something quieter than rescue but just as powerful. Hannah stood for a moment before going inside, breathing in the cool air, aware that tonight had not solved her life, but it had given her something she had been missing. Safety without strings attached. The drive back felt longer than it had any right to be, even though the roads were still clear and the traffic lights mostly green. Ethan kept the window cracked, letting the cool air move through the cab, carrying away the last of the tension that had settled into his shoulders. He did not replay the night in his head the way he once might have. He had learned that second-guessing quiet decisions only stole peace after it had been earned. What mattered was that Hannah was safe behind a locked door with someone she trusted, and that the night had ended without another wound being added to a long list. When he pulled into his driveway, the house looked the same as it always did, small, unremarkable, steady. He cut the engine and sat for a moment, listening to the familiar sounds of the neighborhood, a distant dog barking, the low hum of a passing car, the quiet that came from people sleeping without knowing how close the night had come to breaking someone else. Inside, the kitchen light still glowed, just as he had left it. Ethan locked the door behind him and moved through the house with practiced care, checking what needed checking, then pausing outside the bedroom door down the hall. He did not open it. He did not need to. The stillness on the other side told him everything was as it should be. He turned back toward the living room and sat down, letting the weight of the night settle without resistance. His phone buzzed once on the coffee table. A message from Hannah. Just 2 sentences. I made it inside. Thank you for staying with me until I got here. Ethan read it once, then again, feeling the quiet confirmation that the choice he had made had been the right one. He typed a reply, careful to keep it grounded, free of promises he could not guarantee. I am glad you are safe. Get some rest. Tomorrow can wait. He set the phone down and leaned back, eyes closed, breathing steady. He did not expect sleep to come easily, but he welcomed the stillness anyway. Across town, Hannah lay awake on her friend's couch, staring at the ceiling fan as it turned slowly overhead. The house was quiet, safe in a way that felt unfamiliar after months of tension disguised as normalcy. Her phone rested on her chest, the screen dark now, but the weight of it grounding. She replayed the night not with panic, but with clarity. The knock at the door. The man who had stayed seated on the stairs instead of pushing past her fear. The way he had listened without trying to own her story. It unsettled her, how much that had mattered. She realized that for a long time she had been explaining herself to someone who had already decided not to hear her. The contrast was sharp enough to hurt. Her phone buzzed again, a new message from a number she almost did not recognize as unfamiliar. It was Ryan. The words were exactly what she had expected and somehow still disappointing. We need to talk. You are making this bigger than it needs to be. Come home so we can fix this. Hannah stared at the message until the letters blurred. The old reflex tugged at her, the urge to smooth things over, to make the discomfort stop even if it meant carrying it alone again. She thought of Ethan's voice in the hallway, steady, unhurried, asking if she was safe without demanding anything in return. She thought of the way he had followed her car without crowding her, close enough to matter, far enough to respect her. She typed a response, then erased it. She typed another, then deleted that too. Finally, she locked the phone and set it face down on the coffee table. For the first time, she chose silence not as surrender, but as a boundary. The next morning came quietly. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, softer than Hannah expected, as if the world had decided to give her a gentler start. She sat up slowly, taking inventory of herself, the fear still there but muted, the sadness present but no longer overwhelming. She reached for her phone and saw another message from Ethan, sent early but without urgency. Checking in. No pressure. Just wanted to know you made it through the night. She smiled before she could stop herself. Yes, she typed back, I am okay. Still figuring things out, but okay. The reply came a few minutes later. That is enough for today. Hannah set the phone down and let that settle. Enough for today. She realized how rarely she had allowed herself that grace. Across town, Ethan went about his morning routine, coffee brewing, tools gathered, the day beginning like any other. But something had shifted, subtle and unannounced. He did not feel like a hero. He felt like a man who had answered a call when it came, and then returned to his life without needing applause. Somewhere between the quiet house and the open road, two people who had been strangers hours earlier had crossed paths in a way that would not be erased by morning. Not because anything dramatic had happened, but because someone had shown up, stayed steady, and left the door open for what came next. The days that followed did not rush toward anything dramatic, and that was exactly what made them different from what Hannah had been living inside for years. Life did not suddenly become lighter, but it became quieter, and in that quiet she began to notice how much noise she had been carrying that did not belong to her. She stayed at her friend's place for a few more nights, answering emails from clients, keeping work moving in small, manageable pieces, letting routine return without pressure. Ryan sent a few more messages, each one shifting in tone, from apologetic to irritated to dismissive, as if cycling through options until one worked. Hannah read them all once, then archived the thread without replying. It felt strange to choose not to explain herself, but the strangeness faded quickly into relief. One evening, while sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open and a half-finished mug of tea growing cold beside her, her phone buzzed with a message from Ethan. It was simple, almost cautious, just wanted to check in. No need to respond if you are busy. She stared at the screen longer than necessary, surprised by the small warmth that spread through her chest. It was not urgency. It was not expectation. It was presence without demand. She typed back slower this time. I am doing better. Still sorting things out, but I feel steadier. The reply came a few minutes later. I am glad. Steady is good. That was all. No follow-up question. No invitation hidden between the lines. Hannah realized how rare that was, how often communication came with hooks attached. Over the next week, their messages stayed like that, light, unforced, existing in the spaces between the rest of life. Ethan mentioned work once, a long day fixing a unit that had been neglected until the heat became unbearable. Hannah laughed at the familiarity of it, how people always waited until things broke completely before asking for help. She shared a small victory of her own, landing a new freelance project after weeks of uncertainty. He replied with quiet encouragement, the kind that did not inflate the moment but acknowledged it. Across town, Ethan moved through his days as he always had, mornings early, tools packed neatly, routes planned efficiently. But there was a subtle shift in how he noticed things, the way his phone felt less like a distraction and more like a point of connection. The way silence no longer felt like something to guard, but something to share when it was right. He did not tell anyone about Hannah. There was nothing to explain yet. He simply carried the knowledge that answering a message had mattered, not because it changed his life, but because it aligned with who he had chosen to be. One afternoon, Hannah found herself back near the neighborhood where she had sent that first message, parked across the street from the coffee shop she used to go to when she needed somewhere neutral to think. She sat in her car for a moment before going inside, aware of the echo the place carried now. Instead of feeling pulled back into fear, she felt grounded by contrast. She ordered a coffee, sat by the window, and opened her laptop, working for an hour without checking her phone. When she finally did, there was a message from Ethan waiting, sent earlier. I am taking a late lunch today. If you are nearby and want company, I will be at the diner on 4th Street. No worries if not. Hannah smiled at the lack of pressure, then surprised herself by typing yes before doubt could interrupt. She arrived a few minutes later, spotting him easily by the window, posture relaxed, attention on a glass of water rather than his phone. He stood when he saw her, a small gesture of respect that did not feel rehearsed. They ordered food, talked about ordinary things, traffic, work frustrations, the strange comfort of routines. There was no need to revisit the night that brought them there. It existed between them without being center stage. Hannah noticed how easy it was to sit across from him without monitoring her words, without bracing for a reaction. Ethan noticed the same, the relief of conversation that did not feel like negotiation. When they parted ways, there was no promise made, no expectation set. Just a shared understanding that some connections did not need to be defined immediately to be real. That evening, Hannah walked back to her friend's apartment with a lighter step, aware that healing was not a straight line but a series of small choices that added up. She had chosen not to go back. She had chosen to listen to herself. And she had chosen, once again, to accept kindness when it appeared, even if it came from a place she had never expected. Somewhere else in the city, Ethan closed his day as he always did, quiet house, steady rhythm, knowing that the most meaningful things often happen without announcement. He did not know where this path would lead, and he did not need to. For now, it was enough to walk it with intention, one unforced step at a time. The shift did not announce itself with fireworks or dramatic declarations. It arrived quietly, the way real changes often do, slipping into ordinary moments and rearranging them from the inside. A week passed, then another, and Hannah noticed that her mornings no longer began with a knot in her stomach. She woke up before her alarm sometimes, not anxious, just aware of the day waiting. The apartment she had moved into felt temporary, but intentional, bare walls, mismatched furniture, sunlight pooling on the floor like it had been invited. She was building something new slowly, without rushing herself to define it. Her communication with Ryan had stopped entirely. No messages, no late-night apologies disguised as questions. The silence felt final, and for the first time, that did not scare her. One afternoon, as she packed up her laptop after finishing a client call, her phone buzzed with a familiar name. Ethan had sent a photo of a handwritten work order, a customer's note scribbled at the bottom thanking him for fixing something no one else had bothered to look at. He added a short message. Some people only notice when something works again. Hannah smiled, recognizing the quiet humor, the shared understanding beneath it. She replied with a picture of her own progress, a design mock-up she was proud of, clean lines, balanced colors, something she had not been able to create while living under constant tension. "Looks like we are both good at fixing what gets overlooked," she wrote. Ethan's response came a few minutes later, or at least not walking past it. That sentence stayed with her longer than she expected. It captured something essential about him, about the night they met, about the choices he continued to make without needing recognition. Later that week, they met again for coffee, this time not by coincidence but by mutual choice. The conversation flowed easily, touching on past experiences without getting trapped in them. Hannah spoke about how she had once mistaken intensity for commitment, how being needed had felt like being valued. Ethan listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, not to signal agreement, but to show he was present. When she finished, he did not offer advice. He simply said, "It makes sense that you stayed as long as you did. You were hoping for consistency, not control." The distinction mattered. It reframed her story in a way that did not blame her for believing in someone. As the afternoon light shifted, Hannah realized something else had changed. She was no longer measuring herself against someone else's reactions. She was not scanning Ethan's face for signs of judgment or approval. She was simply talking, existing as she was, and that felt like a kind of freedom she had not known before. When they parted, there was a pause, a moment where old habits might have filled the space with uncertainty, but instead, Ethan spoke plainly. "I am glad we are taking this slow," he said. Hannah nodded. "Me too." It felt right to let things grow without pressure, to allow trust to build from consistency rather than promises. That evening, alone in her apartment, Hannah reflected on the path that had brought her here. It had started with fear, with a message sent through tears, with a stranger who did not ignore it. But the real turning point had not been the rescue. It had been everything that followed. The respect, the space, the absence of manipulation. She realized that what she had been missing was not love itself, but safety within it. Across town, Ethan ended his day the same way he always did, locking up, turning off lights, settling into the quiet he valued. He thought about Hannah, not with urgency or expectation, but with appreciation. He had not set out to change anyone's life, and he did not believe that he had. He had simply responded in a way that aligned with his values, and the rest had unfolded naturally. As he sat down with a book he had been meaning to finish, his phone buzzed once more. A message from Hannah. "Thank you for letting things be simple." Ethan typed back after a moment, "Simple does not mean shallow. It means honest." He set the phone aside and returned to his book, content in the knowledge that sometimes the most meaningful connections are the ones that do not demand to be labeled. They earn their place through steadiness, through showing up, through the quiet dignity of choosing not to walk away when it matters most. Time did what it always does when people stop fighting it. It moved forward quietly, stitching small moments together until they began to resemble something stable. Hannah settled into her new apartment, learning its sounds, the way the floor creaked near the window, the way the afternoon light shifted across the walls. It was not the place she had imagined for herself years ago, but it was honest, paid for by her own work, filled only with things she had chosen. That mattered more than size or perfection. Her days found a rhythm again, client calls in the morning, design work in focused stretches, walks in the evening when the air cooled and the city slowed. She no longer checked her phone with dread. When it buzzed, it was usually something ordinary, a message from a friend, a project update, or sometimes a short note from Ethan, never demanding, never urgent. One evening, after a long day that had ended better than it began, Hannah paused before sending a message she had typed and erased twice. She finally pressed send. "Would you like to come over for dinner sometime?" Nothing fancy, just food and conversation. The response came a few minutes later. "That sounds good. Thank you for asking. Let me know what day works for you." The simplicity of it made her smile. When Ethan arrived a few nights later, he brought nothing but himself, no grand gesture, no need to impress. They cooked together in the small kitchen, navigating around each other easily, sharing the space without tension. Hannah noticed how attentive he was, not hovering, just aware, moving with the quiet competence of someone used to being responsible for more than himself. They ate at the small table by the window, talking about work, about the city, about things they had once wanted and things they had learned to release. At one point, Hannah hesitated, then spoke carefully. "I realized something recently," she said. "I used to think love was supposed to feel like intensity all the time. Like if it was not hard, it was not real." Ethan listened, fork resting on his plate. "And now," he asked gently. "Now I think I confused anxiety with passion," she replied. "Being on edge with being invested." Ethan nodded, considering her words. "Peace can feel unfamiliar if you have not had much of it," he said. "That does not make it empty. It makes it sustainable." The word lingered between them, not as a promise, but as a possibility. Later, as they washed dishes together, Hannah felt a shift inside herself, subtle but undeniable. She was not performing. She was not shrinking or over-explaining. She was simply present, and that presence was enough. After Ethan left, she stood for a moment in the quiet apartment, letting the evening settle, aware that whatever this was, it was built on choice, not fear. Across town, Ethan drove home with the windows down, the night air cool against his skin. He thought about how easy the evening had been, how nothing had needed to be proven. He did not rush the feeling. He had learned that good things did not need to be chased. They stayed when given room. A few days later, Hannah received a message she had not expected. Ryan had emailed her, the subject line brief, the tone clipped. He wanted to talk, said there were things he needed to say, accused her of shutting him out. Hannah read the email once, then closed it. The old pull stirred faintly, habit more than longing, but it did not take hold. She opened a new message to Ethan instead, not asking for advice, just sharing honestly. He replied later that evening. "You do not owe access to someone who did not protect your trust. Silence can be a complete answer." Hannah felt the truth of that settle deeply. She replied with a simple thank you, then archived the email and did not look back. That night, as she prepared for bed, she realized something important. The turning point in her life had not been leaving Ryan. It had been staying gone. It had been choosing herself again and again in small, quiet ways. And somewhere along that path, she had met someone who did not confuse presence with possession. Ethan, for his part, went about his days without expectation, but with a quiet awareness that something meaningful was unfolding, not because of effort, but because of alignment. He did not know where it would lead, and he did not need to. What mattered was that when the moment came to show up, he had done so with integrity. And now, that choice was echoing forward, steady and unforced, shaping something real. The moment Hannah understood that fear had been the loudest voice in her past decisions came quietly, without drama, on an ordinary evening when nothing was actively wrong. She was sitting at her small kitchen table, laptop closed, dinner finished, the hum of the refrigerator filling the space that used to be occupied by constant second-guessing. Her phone lay beside her, screen dark, no notifications waiting, and for the first time in a long while, that silence did not feel like abandonment. It felt earned. She thought about the email she had archived days earlier, the one Ryan had sent, demanding closure on his terms, framing her distance as cruelty. The old version of herself would have responded immediately, would have explained, softened, apologized for boundaries she had every right to set. That version believed that peace came from keeping others comfortable. This version was learning something different. Peace came from not betraying herself. She picked up her phone and scrolled back through older messages, not from him, but from herself. Notes she had typed during the weeks after she left, reminders written late at night when doubt crept in. "You left for a reason. Do not rewrite history just because you are lonely." Those words still rang true. Loneliness, she realized, was not the same as emptiness. One could be felt without the other. Across town, Ethan ended a long workday later than planned, the last call stretching into evening as he helped an elderly couple restore heat to a house that had been cold for days. He did not rush the job. He never did. When he finally drove home, the sky was dark, the streets familiar, and his mind calm in a way it had not always been. He thought briefly of Hannah, not with concern, but with respect. She had been making her own choices, standing on her own feet. He did not feel the need to monitor or manage that process. If anything, he admired it. That night, Hannah's phone buzzed again, unexpectedly. A new message, this time from a number she recognized but had hoped would remain quiet. Ryan had tried a different angle. "I saw you moved on fast. Guess you were never that invested." The words were sharp, designed to provoke, to pull her back into defense. Hannah felt the familiar spike of anger, then the familiar urge to justify herself. But something interrupted that pattern. She paused. She read the message again, slower this time, hearing it not as accusation, but as confirmation of what she had escaped. This was the voice that twisted reality, that reduced her growth to betrayal. She did not owe this voice anything. She set the phone down without replying. Minutes passed. The world did not end. Her chest loosened. The power in that choice surprised her. She did not feel victorious. She felt clear. Later that night, she sent Ethan a message, not because she needed reassurance, but because she wanted to mark the moment with honesty. "I realized tonight that I am not afraid of being alone anymore. I was afraid of starting over." The response came after a short pause. Starting over is not failure. It is correction. Hannah smiled, feeling the truth of that settle into place. The next morning, she woke with purpose instead of anxiety. She finalized paperwork for her apartment, scheduled future projects, and booked a weekend trip she had postponed for years because it would have inconvenienced someone else. Each small action reinforced the same message. She was choosing her life deliberately now. When she met Ethan later that week, there was something different in how she carried herself. He noticed it immediately, the steadiness, the absence of apology in her posture. They walked through a local market, talking about nothing urgent, sampling food, sharing quiet observations. At one point, Hannah stopped and turned to him. "I want you to know something," she said. "I am not with you because you helped me that night. I am with you because I like who I am when I am around you." Ethan held her gaze, understanding the weight of that distinction. "That matters," he said, "because no one should be chosen out of fear or gratitude, only out of clarity." As they continued walking, Hannah felt the last thread tying her to her old life loosen and fall away. She was no longer reacting. She was choosing. And that choice, grounded and unforced, felt like the most powerful thing she had done yet. Somewhere between the crowded stalls and the open air, between who she had been and who she was becoming, Hannah understood that the hardest decision she would ever make had already been made. She had chosen not to go back. Everything after that was simply living forward. What surprised Hannah most in the days that followed was not how much her life had changed, but how little noise accompanied the change. There were no dramatic confrontations, no final speeches delivered to an audience that had never really listened. There was just movement, steady and intentional, away from what no longer fit. She finished moving the last of her things into the apartment on a Saturday morning, the boxes fewer than she expected, a quiet confirmation that she had already let go long before she physically left. As she unpacked, she noticed how each object found a place without negotiation, how the space accepted her without conditions. That afternoon, her phone buzzed with a notification she had not blocked, but also had not checked in days. Ryan had left a voicemail. She did not listen to it immediately. Instead, she finished what she was doing, washed her hands, and sat down at the small table by the window. When she finally pressed play, his voice filled the room, familiar and distant at the same time. He sounded calmer now, measured, as if he believed restraint would succeed where anger had not. He talked about history, about shared memories, about how no relationship was perfect. He said he missed her. He said he did not understand how she could walk away without a conversation. Hannah listened to the entire message without interruption, not because she owed him that attention, but because she wanted to be sure of her own clarity. When it ended, she did not feel pulled. She felt finished. She deleted the voicemail and blocked the number, not with bitterness, but with finality. The decision felt less like a door slamming shut and more like a window opening somewhere else. Later that evening, she met Ethan for a walk, the air cool, the sky beginning to darken as streetlights flickered on one by one. They did not talk about Ryan immediately. They talked about work, about plans for the coming week, about ordinary things that felt newly possible. As they walked, Hannah slowed and stopped, turning to face him. "I did something today," she said. Ethan waited. Giving her the space to continue, I blocked him. Completely. I listened to the message first, but I did not respond. I just ended it. She watched Ethan's face carefully, half expecting concern, half expecting praise. He gave neither. Instead, he nodded once. "How do you feel?" he asked. Hannah considered the question honestly. "Lighter," she said, not relieved exactly. "Just clear." Ethan smiled slightly. Clarity lasts longer than relief. They resumed walking, the path ahead visible in the soft glow of the lamps. Hannah realized then that this was the moment she had been working toward. Not the first night of escape, not the weeks of rebuilding, but this quiet decision made without fear driving it. She was no longer reacting to him. She was choosing herself. Over the next few days, that choice showed up in small ways. She declined projects that did not respect her time. She said no without over-explaining. She rested without guilt. Each act reinforced the same truth. She did not need chaos to feel alive. She did not need to be chosen at the expense of her own peace. Ethan watched these changes with admiration, careful not to interfere, aware that growth belonged to the person doing the work. One evening, as they sat together after dinner, Hannah spoke with a steadiness that surprised even her. "I think this is the first time I am building a life instead of trying to survive one," she said. Ethan met her eyes. "That is what it looks like from here, too." The words settled between them, not as a promise of what would come next, but as an acknowledgement of where they stood. There was no rush to define the future, no need to lock anything in place. What mattered was that Hannah had made a decision rooted in respect for herself, and Ethan was there not as a rescuer, but as a witness. That night, as Hannah returned to her apartment, she stood for a moment at the door before going inside, aware that the chapter she had closed would not reopen. The world felt quieter, not empty, but open. She stepped forward, carrying with her the knowledge that choosing not to go back was not an act of loss, but the beginning of something solid, something earned, something finally her own. What followed did not feel like a dramatic turning point so much as a settling, the way dust eventually falls after something has been moved and the air finally clears. Hannah began to notice how her days carried less tension, how her shoulders no longer lifted instinctively when her phone buzzed, how silence had become a companion instead of a threat. The apartment started to feel lived in, not because it was filled, but because it reflected her pace. She arranged furniture slowly, choosing pieces that served her instead of impressing anyone else. She framed one photograph from her childhood and placed it on a shelf, a quiet reminder of who she had been before she learned to doubt herself. Her work flourished in ways she had not anticipated. Without constant emotional drain, her focus sharpened. Clients responded to her clarity. Deadlines felt manageable. She realized that stability was not something given by another person, but something built internally and protected through boundaries. Ethan remained a steady presence, not woven into every hour, but consistently present in the spaces that mattered. They met for walks, shared meals, and sometimes simply sat together without the need to fill the air. There was comfort in that, the kind that came from mutual respect rather than urgency. One evening, as they sat on a park bench watching the city settle into night, Hannah spoke without rehearsing. "I used to think love meant being needed all the time," she said. Ethan listened, eyes on the path ahead, posture relaxed. "Now I think it means being able to breathe and still choosing to stay." Ethan nodded. "Needing someone and choosing someone are very different things," he said. That distinction mattered to her. It reframed everything she had been taught to endure. Over the next week, Hannah took another step she had been postponing. She changed her emergency contact information, removing Ryan's name, replacing it with her friend's, and, after a pause, adding Ethan's with his consent. The act felt symbolic but grounding. She was not erasing the past. She was reorganizing her present. She did not announce the change to anyone. She did not need validation for it. Across town, Ethan faced his own quiet reckoning. He reflected on how easily he had slipped into the role of helper that night, how natural it had felt, and how different this connection was from others he had known. He was careful not to confuse responsibility with control. He did not want to become someone Hannah relied on out of fear. He wanted to be someone she chose out of strength. That awareness guided him, kept his actions aligned with intention. One afternoon, Hannah received an unexpected message from a former colleague, someone she had lost touch with during the years she had been shrinking her world. The message was simple, asking if she would be interested in collaborating on a new project. Hannah felt a surge of excitement, followed by a flicker of doubt. The old pattern surfaced briefly, the urge to minimize herself, to assume she was not ready. She caught it, paused, and replied yes. When she told Ethan later, his reaction was immediate but measured. "That sounds like an opportunity you earned," he said. "How do you feel about it?" Hannah smiled. "Nervous, but excited." Ethan nodded. "That usually means it matters." The project moved forward quickly, and with it came a sense of momentum Hannah had not felt in years. She realized that choosing herself did not isolate her. It expanded her world. The more she acted from clarity, the more aligned opportunities appeared. One evening, as they prepared dinner together, Hannah turned to Ethan and spoke with certainty. "I am not afraid of the future anymore," she said. "Not because I know what will happen, but because I trust myself to handle it." Ethan met her gaze, understanding the weight of that statement. "Trusting yourself is the foundation of everything else," he said. That night, as Hannah returned to her apartment, she stood by the window and looked out at the city lights, feeling a quiet gratitude for the path that had brought her here. A wrong number, a message sent through tears, a stranger who did not walk away, and then a series of choices made deliberately, without drama, without apology. She realized that healing had not arrived as a single moment, but as a pattern of respect repeated until it became normal. And that, she understood, was the truest kind of transformation. By the time autumn settled in, the change in both of their lives no longer felt fragile. It had weight now, substance, the kind that came from repetition rather than excitement. Hannah's apartment had become a true home, not because it was perfect, but because it reflected her choices. Her mornings began with intention, coffee by the window, a short list of tasks she respected instead of feared. Work continued to grow not explosively, but steadily, and that steadiness felt like trust returning to her own hands. Ethan remained present in her life in the same way he always had, consistent, grounded, never overstepping. Their time together did not revolve around healing conversations anymore. It revolved around living. One afternoon, as they walked through a quiet neighborhood lined with trees shedding their leaves, Ethan mentioned something in passing. "I will need to head out a little earlier tonight," he said. "There is someone who expects me home before it gets too late." He did not elaborate. He did not need to. Hannah did not ask questions. She simply nodded, understanding the boundary without feeling excluded by it. There was something reassuring about that, about knowing that his life did not orbit around her, and yet he chose to share space with her anyway. Later that evening, Hannah found herself reflecting on that moment. In her past relationship, she had been expected to be available at all times, to adjust her needs to accommodate someone else's unpredictability. With Ethan, there was a different rhythm. Responsibility was not used as leverage. It was simply acknowledged. That difference mattered more than any grand gesture ever had. Days later, Hannah received confirmation that the collaborative project she had accepted was moving forward at a higher level than expected. The opportunity required travel, meetings, and a leap of confidence she would have avoided before. This time, she accepted without hesitation. When she told Ethan, he listened carefully, then smiled. "That sounds like something you worked hard for," he said. "I am proud of you." There was no trace of insecurity in his voice, no subtle concern about how it might affect them, just support offered freely. Hannah realized then how rare that was. To be encouraged without being managed, to be celebrated without being claimed. One weekend, as they spent a quiet afternoon together, Hannah asked a question she had been carrying for a while. "Why did you come that night?" she asked softly. "You did not know me. You did not know what you were walking into." Ethan took a moment before answering, choosing his words with care. "Because I read a message that sounded like someone had nowhere to turn," he said, "and because I promised myself a long time ago that I would not ignore that again." Hannah did not press for more. She did not need the details. The answer was enough. It spoke of a man guided by values rather than impulse, by memory rather than ego. As the weeks continued, their connection deepened without urgency. They did not rush to define it. They did not fill the future with assumptions. They let trust do its quiet work. Hannah noticed how her body responded differently now, less guarded, more open. She was no longer bracing for disappointment. She was present, attentive, capable of joy without fear of its cost. One evening, after a long day, Hannah returned to her apartment and stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker on. She thought about the path she had walked, the fear she had faced, the choice she had made not to go back. She understood now that strength did not arrive in a single moment of courage. It arrived through consistency, through saying no when it mattered, through allowing herself to be supported without surrendering herself in the process. Somewhere else in the city, Ethan closed his door for the night, the house settling into its familiar quiet. He felt content, not because everything was resolved, but because his actions aligned with his principles. He had not sought recognition. He had not expected anything in return. And yet, Through a wrong number and a simple decision to show up, something meaningful had grown. Not loudly, not dramatically, but honestly. And that, for both of them, was more than enough. The ending did not arrive with a grand announcement or a moment meant for an audience. It arrived the way truth often does, quietly, after everything unnecessary had fallen away. Hannah stood in her apartment one evening, the windows open to let in the cool air, the city humming softly below, and realized that she was no longer measuring her life against what it used to be. She was living it as it was. There were no unanswered messages waiting on her phone, no tension in her chest when footsteps echoed in the hallway, no instinct to explain herself to someone who had already decided not to listen. What she felt instead was space. Space to think. Space to choose. Space to breathe without permission. She thought back to that first night, to the message sent through tears, to the fear that had convinced her she could not run. She understood now that the fear had never been about him coming back. It had been about her not believing she could leave. That belief had changed, not because someone rescued her, but because someone showed her what respect looked like and then trusted her to do the rest. Across the city, Ethan ended another ordinary day the same way he always did, locking up, turning off lights, letting the house settle into silence. His life looked much the same from the outside, the same work, the same routines, the same responsibilities, and yet something essential had shifted inside him as well. He carried a deeper certainty now, the quiet knowledge that doing the right thing did not always require recognition. Sometimes it simply required showing up, then stepping back when it was time. He did not see himself as the reason Hannah had healed. He never had. He saw himself as a man who had answered a message when it mattered and then respected the strength of the person on the other end. When they spent time together now, it was unburdened by the past. They talked about plans, about work, about small observations that made them laugh. There was no need to revisit what had been escaped. It no longer defined either of them. One evening, as they sat together watching the city lights come on one by one, Hannah spoke with a calm certainty that surprised her. "I do not feel broken anymore," she said. "Not fixed, just whole." Ethan nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Whole did not mean untouched. It meant integrated. It meant honest. It meant no longer at war with yourself. As the seasons continued to turn, life carried on in its steady way. Hannah built a future that reflected her values. Ethan lived his life guided by the same principles that had brought him to her door that night. There was no dramatic payoff, no moment where the world stopped to applaud, and that was the point. The real reward was not romance or recognition. It was dignity restored. It was fear replaced with clarity. It was the quiet miracle of two people choosing integrity over impulse. Somewhere out there, messages were being sent every day, some reaching the right person, some not. But every now and then, a wrong number found the right answer. Not because of fate or luck, but because someone on the other end chose not to look away. And sometimes, that single choice was enough to change everything, not loudly, not instantly, but permanently. In the end, there was no villain left to confront, no argument to win, no door to slam shut. There was only silence, not the heavy kind that once felt like abandonment, but the peaceful kind that comes after truth, the kind that settles in a room where nothing more needs to be said. And in that silence, both of them stood exactly where they belonged.